What's wrong with this thing? Let me pull this up. All right, so I'm gonna go live in 3, 2, 1, record. Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. The Jason Cavness Experience is brought to you by Cavness HR. Cavness HR, focus on your business where you got your HR. Our guest today is Frank Carbajal. Frank, are you ready to be great today?
Yes.
Frank is founder and president of EsTiempo, the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit, and author of Building the Latino Future, Success Stories for the Next Generation, an inspiring collection of success stories from the country's most prominent Latinos. Building the Latino Future offers insights and advice for Latinos in any industry who wants to succeed spectacularly. The SVLL Summit brings together the best and the brightest for inspirational discussions on everything from entrepreneurship to politics to executive management. EsTiempo is one common thread that aligns the speakers year after year. This unique event happens to cater to Latinos, particularly young and upcomers hoping to build meaningful careers. As formerly part of the Kim Blanchard network of keynote speakers and a former member of the Silicon Valley Coaches Federation, he also provides small business owners, CEOs, executives, and managers and directors with the framework and tools necessary to achieve their personal best. Frank also advises many diversity inclusion teams across the Silicon Valley and beyond. He holds an MBA, a master's with an emphasis in human resource management, and he currently sits on the advocacy board for the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. Frank, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me as a guest. And I'd like to say good morning and good afternoon to folks on the East Coast and a good late evening on folks overseas. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Frank. So why is it important from your point of view to highlight successful Latinos?
You know, one of the things that I like to always emphasize is perception and creating a narrative that is positive for Latinos across the board. And it's very important because we really are passing the baton, like I like to say, to Generation Z and today's millennials. And as a profile for our community, I take it seriously to be accountable and responsible for not only the Latinos in our community, but for my own family members. I'm a father of 3 young daughters and a proud husband. So I always feel it's so important to continue not only the profiling, but creating that narrative, our stories.
And one thing, like in the bio, you mentioned how Latinos are successful across a broad brand of industries, right? They're not focused on one industry. Talk about that, how Latinos are successful everywhere across America and across the world in different industries.
Yeah, Latinos across the world in various industries. It's a great question. You know, when I was creating the manuscript for my book, Building the Latino Future, Success Stories for the Next Generation, I really wanted to touch on stories that were of diverse industries with a complex world, being that it was folks that had emphasis in nonprofit leadership, executive leadership, entrepreneurial leadership, to folks that are educators of America. And for me, it was important to really identify Latinos and Latinas that are working in those specific industries, to interview them, to showcase what is the common thread, what was their struggles, what were things that they had to overcome in terms of blocks that were in their way. And it was a navigation tool for all Latinos to really have that tool set, if you will, to succeed.
Can you talk some about your Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit? What's the point of that? What's the emphasis on that? And how long have you been doing it?
Yeah, so the point of the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit really came to fruition in 2010. But prior to 2010, my book, Building the Latino Future, Success Stories for the Next Generation, was launched nationally and internationally in 2009, based on the fact that it was launched. There was a market crash in 2008 going into 2009. And I had to really pivot and think quickly on how to continue the momentum of making sure that my book would sell, because at that time, of course, when the market crashed, Jeff Bezos also started swallowing up all the border books, all the Barnes and Noble. So I had to creatively think, how can I showcase folks that are in my book to have individuals that are millennials and leaders in industries have access to these leaders in my book, Building a Latino Future. So my thought was to meet with a mentor. His name's Dick Gonzalez. And Dick Gonzalez says, hey, Frank, you should have a leadership summit that has these thought leaders from your book, talk about their success stories. And I said, well, that's a great idea to have a summit. Where should I have it? And he's like, you should think of having it not only here in the Silicon Valley, but have it on Sand Hill Road. Sand Hill Road is known as the venture capital mecca of the world. So the first summit was in 2010 on Sand Hill Road.
And are you gonna have to do a virtual this year? I'm guessing.
Well, no, that's a great question. Actually, I really like folks to have access to people, person to person. So what I'm doing is I'm waiting for state and local officials to let me know when it is safe to have the summit. So speaking of virtually, I have a show this afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, EsTiempo with Frank, which is it's known as a webinar for folks that are speakers for the 2020 agenda that will be speaking every 2 weeks is the EsTiempo with Frank show. So in terms of the live summit, it will happen, and I'll announce it based off the fact that the Computer History Museum in Mountain View and state and local officials inform me when it's safe to have, but it will happen.
Frank, can you talk some why diversity and inclusion is important for startups, even at the earlier stages?
Yes, diversity and inclusion at the early stages really starts actually in all sectors. In terms of what I mean by sectors is we have the public and we have the private sectors. And diversity and inclusion, for example, in the public sector, you may see it a little more prevalent, but in the private sector, the numbers are very, I don't like saying discouraging, because we need to be encouraged, because we have the degrees, we have the folks that are very talented, but we just need to make sure that our folks in our community are not only mentored, but sponsored into these positions in the private sector industry. When it starts with industries such as, for example, private companies that are Fortune companies, the percentage is very low in terms of representation. When it's in private equity and investment and venture capital, the numbers are below 2% in terms of our representation. So diversity is there, but the inclusion piece is missing. And not only being inclusive in this equation, if you will, but it's also being at the table. And that's where the numbers lack even more. So there's two pieces to it. There's mentorship and there's sponsorship. And the latter, sponsorship, is what's really critical in terms of elevating the roles for diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think that everyone sees a stat where it says you have a diverse and inclusive company, your ROI and profits go way up, right? But it's like most people are still doing the old things, right? Why? How can we change that? I mean, the business cases out there, the social impacts out there, but it's like people are still like hiring their beer drinking buddies, right? Or people they know. They're not making an effort to go out and recruit. Like people say, well, I try, but have you really tried? If you hired like your 10 people from the same place and you go back to the same place over and over again, I mean, what do you expect, right?
Well, and that's a great observation, and it really starts at a very young age. If you think about it, in elementary school to middle school to high school, it's already starting in terms of groups and networks and how folks are comfortable and not getting out of their comfort zone. So diversity starts at a very young age. It starts as soon as elementary school. So we have to have teachers and educators encourage mixing groups up. In terms of mixing groups up, is diversity really is diverse when you are challenged. And the folks that need to be challenged are the adults in the room. And so as we transform into the latter part of life, when we're in colleges, that colleges are still very exclusive, not inclusive. When we talk about fraternities and sororities, that is when the networks and the power of networks start. The good old boy network exists profoundly, and really to be involved in someone's network and the golf course, to not only the golf course, but to the country club of networking, those images are so profound that in order for us to be part of an image, that is the reason why I started the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit and my book, Building the Latino Future, Success Stories for the Next Generation, is to show our image, EsTiempo, to share our stories so that the narrative from the outside looking in, for example, the non-Latinos could see, wow, these folks, our folks, are moving and shaking. And so it's inevitable that we're not only going to be invited to the table, but we're going to make noise and be the rebel rousers at the table.
I think it's another challenge too. For example, we'll take two college kids, right? One college kid, has both parents, decent background, and he doesn't have to get a job right away, right? So he can afford to take a couple of years off, live with his parents, maybe do a startup, experiment or whatever. Another kid, a single parent that maybe has a high school education, working in level jobs. So this kid graduates, he's probably counting on to get a job right away and help support their family, right? So I think that's another disconnect, and I don't know how to fix that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I love the reality behind that point, because as Latinos, most of our parents generationally coming to the United States, my parents only had a third, fourth grade education. So across the board, it exists today. In 2020, we have agricultural areas here in California, whether it's Salinas or Bakersfield, Fresno, down in Southern California, Imperial Valley, that still exists in terms of the farm workers that are feeding our country. And with that being said, it's really difficult for a first generation or second generation to really not only excel in school, but feel confident. So the confidence really has to come from the outside. And when I say the outside, mentorship is so key. So for all the Latinas and Latinos and Latinx community listening to this podcast right now, it is very critical under COVID-19 to continue not only to mentor, but post COVID-19, build those relationships for these young folks in college that not only instill that confidence, but make sure that they're feeling comfortable to connect with you continuously. Because in terms of Latino success, it is more of a continuum. When I say continuum, it's never ending. There's no, as you had mentioned, for other folks outside of the Latino community, there's no gray area. For our community, it's black and white. We can't step in the middle and say, oh, we could pivot and wait a couple of years to go back to college. There is no way. There is no way. And I always emphasize the point that as a Latino, we're not fortunate to be the Steve Jobs or the Mark Zuckerberg or others that have dropped out of college and create, this great idea. If we have an idea, we have to really not only hold on to that idea. Of course, it's important to pitch that idea, but we must finish college.
And one thing
that's my perspective.
And one thing people forget about Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, like Jeff Bezos, we forget that his parents gave him like $300,000 to start the company, right? Like that does happen every day. And Steve Jobs' mother was on some kind of board with the IBM person, so that's a connection, right? And stuff like that. And so I have a good friend, Ronnie Trevino. He's in the Bay Area, and here's a good example. He grew up in Stockton, had no idea about startups, all that kind of stuff. Joined the Army, got out, and somehow got involved and became a product manager. And now he's been involved with startups for 4 or 5 years. But he was like telling me, like he had an idea that this world was like just an hour away from Stockton, right? He had no clue about it, right? He just came about by happenstance, and now he's like involved with startups and tech the world, pretty heavily. But he had no idea about it growing up. He just came back from the Army and just found out about it by mistake.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. What you mentioned about R&D and ROI and product management, it really is fortunate for your friend that he had the experience and later the skins in the game. But the difference is, and you said he was raised in Stockton, right?
I believe
The
so.
difference, yeah. The difference is that folks that grow up in, I say, privileged families, they're exposed to not only the language but the action. Language action is something that is what really builds that confidence for a lot of these other kids. And for our community, we're not used to the language and the action in entrepreneurship as far as venture capital and other things are concerned. We're used to different forms of entrepreneurship, but the different forms of entrepreneurship isn't what America is really taking. Not only taking, they're taking it for granted, but they're not really blessing it in terms of something that is sustainable, if you will.
Yeah, you're right. It's like the Silicon VCs there's all these unwritten rules, right? And there's no way you can know them unless you network with them and get involved in the community.
That's exactly it. And getting into the Silicon Valley network of groups is it's challenging, and it takes a long time. But once you're in, it really takes, as I'd mentioned earlier, the person to be responsible and accountable to share network. And I think that that's where, as Latinos, we need to be a little more responsible in sharing all our networks. And for me, as you may know, Jason, I am very selfless about sharing my networks and my contacts, because it's important to share, contacts of folks, because if we don't, then what's going to happen is we're going to be falling further behind.
Yes. Frank, can you talk about your role? I believe you said Angelus Investing or Angels Investing.
Yeah. It's Angeles and Investment Group is a group that started in Chicago, and it's co-founded by two friends of mine, David Olivencia and Marcelo DeSantis. And these two folks are in the technology world. In terms of technology world, one is a consultant and the other works in various roles, from consulting to executive coaching. And that's Marcelo, who does executive coaching. And they invited me to be part of their advisory network group, because down the road, what they would like to see in terms of Angeles investors is have more activity in terms of Latino activity here in the Silicon Valley. And my role as founder of EsTiempo is to really look at having a pitch competition down the road here in the Silicon Valley.
And how do y'all decide who to invest?
And what I mean, yeah. And one of the things that is important as far as investing in investing in startups, is to look at entrepreneurs, startups that are outliers in the sense of technology. So the groups and startups that we're looking to invest in are in the tech space, and with that, there is a due diligence and a process where they would submit to Angeles directly. And with that, for example, there's a pitch competition in late May, a virtual pitch competition, and the decks that are received, we really want to look at those who are very innovative in the tech startup space.
Okay. And is there any certain demographic you want to focus on for the investments, or you take all comers?
No, that's an excellent question. We really want to focus on Latinx, Latino, Hispanic groups that are entrepreneurs, and that's because it was created for Latino entrepreneurs and motivated to inspire and identify and fund Latinx entrepreneurs.
So would one, like, suppose it's too comfortable, would one person have to be a Latino? Can you have like 6 employees and like a low level employee be a like Latin, or some of the board members is like a certain like cut and paste point you have?
That's an excellent question. For example, one entrepreneur reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. This entrepreneur is from Colombia, from Cali, Colombia, professional soccer player, and he's educated in Arizona. He has a master's degree from Arizona State University, and he created this fascinating idea. But his team composition is made up of a diverse team. It's not only Latinos, but what we're looking at is, and I asked him directly, I said, who is the founder of this idea? And he said he was. So that process and that clarification from him alone will provide us the excitement to look at his deck. And so in terms of the entire team, as long as the founder or co-founder is Latinx representation, then that's what we're looking at. But if the entire team, for example, outside of the founder or co-founder aren't Latino or Latina, that's okay. Just as long as the founder or co-founder are of Latinx representation.
Okay. And can you go to more detail about your pitch event? I believe it's May 29th of this year.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'll provide you, for your listeners, I'll provide you the link of where they could go for Angeles Investors Group for late May, because that competition, pitch competition, I was asked to be an advisor after that pitch competition was formed. So as an advisor, I'm going to be on the call to listen to these entrepreneurs, but for your listeners, I'll provide that link for late May. But in the future, my involvement as the Silicon Valley looks at hosting a pitch competition, then of course I have more skins in the game for that particular event in the future. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So here's a question for you. Like, suppose someone sends you a pitch deck, they apply to be in the pitch competition.
Yeah.
And you like the company and all, but they're like, there's no Hispanics on, no Latinos and that. I'm guessing you do for that deck to one of your connections, or how would that work? Or do you say, hey, this event is for you, but let me connect you with someone else?
Yeah. And, as an advisor, I'm very, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I'm very much about empowering humanity and all folks. And so I would, respectfully let the person know, let me look at my network of folks within my social platform of, EsTiempo and LinkedIn, the followers that I do have, that I'm fortunate to have, or the folks that I network through my network on LinkedIn and other avenues. I would definitely respectfully connect that person. For example, if the person had, a Jewish background, I'm very well connected in the Israeli community. I would connect them with a person by the name of Moshe, who is a mover and shaker in the Jewish community. If the person was African American, then I'm very well connected with folks in the African American community. If the folk that asked the question is a person of Asian community, then I would make sure to connect them with an Asian community representative person that is in that industry.
Yes. Next question. So I went to the thing called Young Startup Venture Summit yesterday. Last 3 days, San Francisco. It was a virtual event. I pitched. So a lot of people are pitching, and like half the people there, instead of pitching, they played a video, right, and did a product demo, which of course, you shouldn't do as a pitch. What mistakes are you finding people when they pitch, and what advice do you have them to do better?
Yeah, don't act out of desperation, and don't act as if you need the money today. You have to build a relationship. I always advise a person to be prepared, but also be prepared to be rejected. And when you're prepared to be rejected, it's not that you're being rejected in the sense that it's not going to ever happen. It's going to prepare you even more to go through your due diligence and feel that you cannot first chase, the capital. You have to have capital chase your passion. And if a person has passion with their product and they understand it really well, then they'll be prepared to pitch. But it takes time. It really is so important for me to let folks know listening, don't get overly excited that you feel so unique that your idea is much different than a person in the same industry. You have to really not only do the due diligence of research, but what makes an outlier is really not only being so passionate about your startup, but understanding that it's different in the sense that you own it and you are the person that's going to make sure that it's going to grow. So it really is about patience and timing, and just because virtually we're hearing about all these pitch competitions, don't get overly excited. Look at if it's a fit for you, and if it's a fit for you, and if you have your passion ready to go, and you have your idea ready to go, and it's not out of just desperation, then you'll be successful.
Yeah, I remember reading a stat somewhere that says, on average, you're going to have to do 100 pitches or going to hear her no's. And a lot of people think, well, 100 no's equals 100 failures. I think you got to look at it more like that. You have 100 opportunities to refine your pitch and get better each time, right?
Exactly. I mean, let's look at the Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan. He would be on the basketball court practicing 1,000 free throws, and per 1,000 free throws, if he made, during practice 100, then that really accelerated his game time, because the noise and the excitement really is channeled in because of practice. And that is what pitch competitions are all about. And that's why I say, with your passion, you have to make sure that, I like to say, you have to push the accelerator and then slow down. And what I mean by that is you have to take a pause and really look at the big picture and say, okay, I'm ready because I have practiced my craft and I understand my product.
Yes, like myself, I started fundraising for my startup, and I've done like 8 pitches the last month. Each time I learned something new, heard a different perspective that I wouldn't have known before.
Yeah, and then with clarity, it's also important to identify, like the fact of your business. Is it going to be for profit, or is it going to be a non-profit? And you really have to know the difference between the two. Commerce, or is it really about fundraising? Is it fundraising in the sense that it's going to be a 501c, or is it going to be a product in commerce where you really want to, make money? And there's the two. And one of the things I like to say is, a person that's an entrepreneur that is all about just making money, you have to really take a step back and say, within that element, make sure that you also have a philanthropic piece of fabric within that business idea. Because a person that's a venture capitalist that's sitting on the other side of the table when you're pitching, they're not going to really get excited about a person that's going in that's just so excited about just making money really fast. There has to be a sense of philanthropy as well.
Yes. Also read an article the other day where it said, like, as an entrepreneur, you have to decide early, do you want to make a lot of money or do you want to control your company? And you can't have both, right? Can you talk about
That's
that a
right.
little bit?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to really have, before all of this, establish folks as part of your team. Like I like to say in basketball, there's a starting five and there's a person off the bench, right? There's a sixth man. So you really have to look at the composition of your team, and the composition of your team is everything, because when you're pitching, a person that is sitting on the other side of the table really wants to know that you have a team that believes in the leader, and the leader, of course, is the person who's pitching, the CEO. And then down the road, you have to really show that it's sustainable. I mean, you don't want, when I say sustainable, you also have to have an exit strategy, right? Because the exit strategy is really what a venture capital likes to look at. What's going to be the plan in terms of acquisition? And sustainable, is it 2 to 5 years, or is it a company that you're looking at exiting in a year? And that really doesn't give much time for a team to build trust, right? So those are some things that I have to say about about sustainability and acquisition and exit strategies.
Frank, can you talk about COVID-19 real fast? Like from your point of view, how's it affecting the startup community? How's it affecting fundraising now in the future?
Yeah, so under COVID-19, in terms of if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to, for example, investment, right now would be a good time to invest and build confidence, right? If you're looking at startups, it's important to pivot, plan, and pursue. The 3 Ps that I like to say, and not give up hope. So I really think under COVID-19, we have to find strategies in terms of communication is key. Communication with folks that are thinking along, and have the same plan you do. So it's really important not to give up hope and really understand that business as usual, but safety is the most important. And I mean by safety is, yes, we could still do the same type of work at home remotely, but it's important to really understand that that soon, we're not gonna be back to normal, but it's up to us to really not let the communication fall through the gaps, if you will.
I mean, because VCs, they still have to invest money, right? They still have money to invest. I mean, they still have to do due diligence and put money in the market, correct? It can't be just a cold stop, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, in terms of investment, you really can't let the money stop. I mean, you really have to look at companies that make sense, like make sense to you now, in terms of healthcare, different apps that folks are forming and creating right now as we speak. We have the due diligence to also look at what's important to invest in.
Yes. Frank, can you talk why HR is important to a startup?
It's the most important thing right now as far as HR is concerned, because HR really has the finger on the pulse in terms of mental health and other aspects of health in general. Human resources is one of the key factors for any company, whether it's small, mid-sized to large, because human resources is the gatekeeper of what makes a company thrive. So, for example, just a couple of days ago, as you may have read, Uber and Airbnb had to lay off tons of employees, and the person behind, making the call or doing a Zoom layoff is the person in the human resources role. So the human resources role is also, it's critical to, unfortunately, during this time, to apply for unemployment. But when a person's applying for unemployment, providing that person some options on where to apply during COVID-19 fits that will fulfill that person's spirit again, because human resources at the end of the day is a mental health empowerment person.
Hey, Frank, you might not know this off the top of your head, but what do the demographics show as far as like successful startups between like Latino, Caucasian, for doing different demographics, female? Is there anything shown like based on, your ethnicity, you're more likely to be successful or not?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And some of the reading and the studying I've done in terms of entrepreneurs and startups is Latinas are on the forefront of being and leading in terms of startups and becoming entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that as, for example, as a father of 3 Latinas, it's time, EsTiempo, that women aren't overlooked, because women have not only the confidence and the courage, but the patience to see that under COVID-19, things are going to be okay. Because as I always like to say, the person who was the boss in my home growing up is my mom, my mama. And the person who's the boss in my home is my wife. I mean, she really is a person that, calms me down during this storm.
Yes.
So it makes sense that And I am so proud that Latina women are leading in terms of entrepreneurship and startups.
Frank, so someone starting a company, of course they tell use your network, reach out to VCs, all that kind of stuff. But you have an idea, you have some traction, but you have no connection to any kind of VCs. Like, and of course some VCs say cold call me, but but they get hundreds and probably thousands of calls, emails every day. You have a company, you have traction, you think you have something, but you need to fundraise, but you have no idea how to get in touch with VC. What do you do?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's how I started back in early 2000s, and that's really starting to do research on a network group that is part about the part of networking was the group that I joined was the National Society of Hispanic MBAs, and it changed its name over to Prospanica. But why that helped me personally was because there was folks within that network that firsthand had contact with venture capitalists, and through that network, I was able to. And you're right, you can't just cold call venture capitalists. For the most part, what I know is venture capitalists, VCs, like to have a cup of cafecito, and today it would be a virtual coffee to find out a little more about you. And when you have that first meeting, I always advise not to ask for funding because VCs really respect a person that is about building a relationship. And that first meeting really has to be about storytelling. And the storytelling will shine when the person that's sharing their personal journey and story has a lot to do with an entrepreneurial drive. And then the second meeting, hopefully you have that second meeting, could be based on really engaging the VC. In terms of engagement, it really is about not wasting the venture capitalist time and talking about your business. And then the third could be emailing that VC and saying, hey, would it be okay for you to look at my deck? And I'll tell you, Jason, too many times, just out of the blue, I'll have folks that'll send me a direct message on my LinkedIn, and they attach a deck to their message, and I've never met this person. Mm-hmm. That is a no. That those things can't happen. You have to establish and build a relationship. And when I say build a relationship, we all have a sense within us and a gut feeling that is a good feeling or a bad feeling. And if it's a bad feeling, what I mean by that is that the person not really listening, then please don't waste your time. And I say this because we've all been through these painful experiences. As you had mentioned, 100 pitches and maybe one yes. It's part of life. And that's how I share with my kids. That's how life works. There's going to be a lot of tears. There's going to be a lot of pain and gutful pain through the process. But when you have a good feeling of a person, in the aha moment is when they lean in literally and they say, tell me a little more. And that is a positive sign.
That's what I'm telling you too. When I do my pitches, I just tell people what I'm trying to do. When people say, "Oh, that's interesting. That's a good idea," to me, I know that's key to word for. They don't care what I'm doing, right? They could care less. But if they start asking questions, then okay, now this guy's interested. He's asking detailed questions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as human beings and from a humanitarian standpoint, it's always important for a person to at least pay attention in terms of respect level to say, it's a great idea, but I have someone that you should maybe contact. At least provide that person with some hope that you have some contact, and not just say, oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. Interesting is a buzzword for no, thank you.
Yes. And one thing I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't get, or they miss the point because they want to get the money as fast as possible. But you bring on outside money, you pretty much agreeing to a 10-year relationship with the VC firm, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You hit it on the head when you said, yeah, that Silicon Valley and the world of the Silicon Valley is an interesting place, because it doesn't happen where a person with a great idea is going to get funded automatically. Especially under COVID-19, we're in recovery planning mode, and VCs do have that wealth and the wealth to invest in individuals, but it's still going to take some time. So that's what I mean about building the relationship, being patient, and understanding that everything takes time.
Yes. Frank, can you give us your social media links so people can reach out to you?
Yes. So folks could email me if they have any questions at Frank at EsTiempo is my business, EsTiempo.com. And if they'd like to know more about the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit, please go to svlls.com. And on LinkedIn, my name's Frank, last name spelled Carbajal. And you could also follow my EsTiempo with Frank twice a month, and it's on today at 3:00 Pacific Standard Time. And we're going to focus on STEM in America for Latinos under COVID-19.
And to our listeners, we have the link to the social media on the show notes. You can find the show notes at www.cabinetshrblog.com, and be sure to share this episode with your friends. So, Frank, we're coming to the end of our talk. Can you give us any advice or wisdom or anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. So just don't fear the worst, because if you fear the worst, then you're going to be discouraged to be the best. So always be empowered through not only your passion, but always be strategic in terms of pitching your idea. Those are the words I have.
Frank, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure, and I am very honored to be on your show today on Friday, May 8th. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. And remember to be great every day.